Good evening. Welcome. I'm Andrew Xu, president of the College of Charleston. Welcome to the inaugural event of the College of Charleston Speaker Series on Public Discourse. I think it is especially poignant that we kick off this new speaker series on Veterans Day, a day upon which we honor those who have defended this nation's freedom. One of the things that makes this country exceptional is the belief and protection of the freedom of expression, the freedom to share your opinions and ideas without fear of being arrested or jailed. As someone who grew up in a country where that wasn't the case, I want to remind everyone here what a remarkable gift and blessing the freedom of speech is. In my opinion, it is the bedrock of American democracy, and it should not be taken for granted. However, the overall tone and content of our speech in current times have lost a sense of civility. It seems at times we are more about yelling and less about listening to one another. While technology has vastly broadened our ability to communicate with each other, we have narrowed what we want or what we are able or want to hear. That is what Kathleen Parker and I discussed back in 2020 when she was our commencement speaker. As an award-winning journalist for Washington Post, she has been on the front lines to see the battle of ideas and the many ways upon which they're waged. We both were lamenting the erosion of public discourse, and out of that conversation sprang the idea for this new speaker series. I want to thank Kathleen for inviting Chris Matthews, a fellow veteran journalist, to talk about the current state of public discourse. I will let Kathleen formally introduce Chris, but I do want to say what an honor it is to have someone of Chris's experience and expertise here on our campus. In fact, he has been talking to our students all day, throughout the day. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Together, Kathleen and Chris will be sharing thoughts and opinions that we may not all agree with, but that is okay. In fact, that is the point that that is why we're gathering here, listening and hearing different perspectives and draw our own conclusions with that information. So to be clear, Kathleen's and Chris's opinions are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or official policies of the College of Charleston.
Isn't that kind?
Before I turn things over to Kathleen and Chris, I want to outline the order of things. Kathleen and Chris will have a conversation, and then we will follow with a very brief question and answer period. At that time, you will simply need to raise your hand, and we will get you a handheld microphone. If you are able, we ask you to
Thank you, President Hsu, and thank you all for fighting the weather to get here and be with us tonight. We were really worried that no one would show, but we're delighted to see you. And when I was a baby reporter here way back in the late 1970s, I covered the city of Charleston, and I covered Mayor Joseph P. Riley, Jr., who had this wild idea that Charleston could become a tourist destination. And I see Robert Rosen in the front seat, and he was a city attorney and one of my favorite sources of information, and we are still talking after all these years. I'm fortunate that I don't really have to say a whole lot because you know who this is, Chris Matthews. But you may not know all of the things that he has done in his life, and it would take way too long to tell you. But he started on Capitol Hill as a Capitol Hill police officer. And then he worked his way up through, he decided to go into the Congress, and he worked most famously for Tip O'Neill. And let's see what else. He's written 8 bestsellers. He was a columnist for the San Francisco Examiner. He and I were both syndicated by the Tribune Company back in the day, and so I guess that's when I met Chris, maybe just about the time you started Hardball 20 years ago. He has now stepped off the television set and is back to writing more books, and was kind enough to come and join us tonight. So as President Hsu explained, we are trying to deal with sort of how did we get to this point with our public discourse getting worse and worse and worse until finally it has resorted, it's evolved into occasional acts of violence, January 6, 2021 being a case in point, the recent attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband, and then of course these rather wild and crazy fringe groups, QAnon and others that continue to, I would say, bait our patience, but also I'm afraid that thanks to social media, they have a great deal of influence over more people than they deserve to have as an audience. But I want to get Chris's thoughts on kind of how we got to this point, because there's got to be a timeline more or less, and sort of a, you were in the days of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. You've talked often about how they got along and were friends outside of the political arena. Talk about that and kind of what you see as the ways and means that we've arrived at this point.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President Hsu. Thank you for having me there. My wife Kathleen's in the audience, Kathleen Matthews. Who's,
Yay.
And my niece and nephew, Susan and Damien, they're here from nearby. And
everybody else are my cousins.
No, we married into the Ravenel family recently.
That's right.
My son did. So that's a great question, because a lot of it is about professionalism. It's not a word I use all the time, but there are professional requirements. Tip O'Neill, when he was Speaker of the House and he had a strong majority, knew that nothing would get done if he didn't go along with it, pretty much. He had Southern members who were Dixiecrats in a sense, but he could bring them along on most issues like Social Security and Medicare, where they were all agreeing. And to get along with Reagan was an essential thing. If he didn't agree with Reagan, they couldn't get anything done. And they ended up ending Social Security, which was probably the most important government program there is, next to the military, and they got it saved. They sat down and figured it out. It was almost like one of those movie portrayals of a kidnapping case where you have to arrange for the delivery of the baby and the money at the exact same time. So they worked it out, so Reagan announced Tip O'Neill's agreement to the deal. It was very precise, but they got it done. They cut taxes down to 28% top marginal rate by getting rid of a lot of the loopholes. In other words, they did the right thing. They got rid of the loopholes, lowered the rate for the honest taxpayer, and that was a good thing. And a lot of other things like Northern Ireland they worked on with Maggie Thatcher. There's a lot of good agreements. It wasn't lovey-dovey. But first of all, Reagan didn't drink at all, really, and Tip didn't drink at work. So, I mean, certainly not at work. And I never saw it. And I thought that they were serious about it. Politics has broken down because the professionalism of running for office is gone. And I give an example of Donald Trump. From the time I was a kid, in 1958, I laid up with my father. We sat in the rec room downstairs, and we watched the midterm elections. and we watched Governor Averell Harriman of New York concede defeat. It's something I will always remember, this man with enormous wealth who had dealt with the handling of the Lend-Lease agreements with Britain and with the Soviet Union and then with the Marshall Plan, an incredible career already. And here he was losing the election. And there he was, my father, who was a middle-class guy, I felt that he felt for this guy. The humiliation of having to say, I thought the people liked me more than this. They didn't like me as much as I thought. This is the deal. And it's the wonderful romance I have with politics. You go in, you try to get the people to like you. When they do, you thank them. If they don't, you accept their decision. Now, everybody has always done this, from Adlai Stevenson on to Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, even people that won many more votes than their opponent, went before the American people and say, I heard you, I tried my best, I lost. That's the American sacrament to me. It's like the prime minister going to visit the king or the queen every week and telling him or her what the government policy is, the head of government meeting the head of state. It's the American agreement, and Trump didn't do it. And I will not forgive him for that. It's an awful decision because it tells the American people, what you did today didn't matter. You had an election, try it. Have another one, who cares? It doesn't matter. And he's trying it again right now with Arizona. He's raising issues again that don't exist. The greatest thing about this country is we're a democracy. And we had a fantastic election this week. All the pollsters were wrong, all the pundits were wrong, I was wrong. But what a turnout. The number of people, and young people, college age here, they came out and voted. They voted their hearts out. People like the governor of New York was scared to death she was going to lose. The senator from Wyoming, from Washington State, from all around the country, Colorado, everybody ran for their lives to get reelected in an honest, open election. It was clean as hell. We are so lucky to have that system, and it's working. It's better than ever. And instead of sitting around hand-wringing about this guy, it's usually this guy, we should be proud of our country because we are the opposite of what Trump said we are. We are a great democracy.
Well, Chris, you and many, many others, including yours truly, thought that, expected the red wave. We saw that that didn't happen. And I think we've been talking to students all day, so we've been kind of getting a feel for how they think about the election, and they all, without, I think, only a few exceptions, all voted. And they, you know, the youth vote helped. I think when I first spoke to you after the election, you said, I come away with two things: women vote and people don't like Donald Trump anymore. But the red wave didn't make it because, do you think that the American people, by and large, are so sick and tired of the stridency from the right, including people who would identify as conservatives, and that they were really trying to, does this signify a kind of an attitude shift in the country, saying enough is enough, and does this election foretell a more, I don't know, I wouldn't say friendly, but at least a more cooperative Congress?
Yeah. Well, DeSantis, the governor of Florida, will probably run against Trump in the Republican primaries. They've all both agreed to run. Biden, fortunately or not, at his age is still going to run, I think, with Kamala. This will be an interesting situation developing here. I want to really try to untangle this problem because it's a real problem, what you started with the days when people on both sides could actually behave professionally. I think it probably goes back, in my experience, to a large extent to the Vietnam War. The Democrats ran that war. It was started with Eisenhower, with a very small number of people participating as advisors. But then under Kennedy, it grew to 18,000 soldiers in country. And then under Lyndon Johnson to 500,000, and Westmoreland wanted 200,000 more. It was just ridiculous. It was never going to stop. He thought we'd win with 200,000 more. Are you kidding? This isn't not working. Why don't you just say it's not working? Because apparently on the inside the Pentagon Papers, inside the White House, they knew the best we could look for was a decent interval of a few years. We were helping out the South, which really wanted to fight the North too. This was a legitimate civil war. I've been teaching over there in Vietnam. the last couple of years, and I've listened to the kids and the students and people around them. It was a civil war as well as an American war. A lot of people didn't want communism, so they fought over that too. But then it became anger over Watergate. The Republicans said, okay, stop running up the score. Okay, Nixon didn't even approve it, but he covered up a Watergate break-in of the headquarters. Is that the worst thing in the world? Come on, stop it already. But the Republicans stomped the Democrats, or the Democrats stomped the Republicans, and that became another source of bitterness.
Well, Chris, both of those things
in
you
other words, they
mentioned.
just really got to hate each other over the other person's attempt to blame it all on them.
Well, I think what you're saying, you know, the war and then Watergate contributed to this sort of partisan split and a great distrust of government, certainly during the Nixon era. And so, but fast forward, the people that were protesting the Vietnam War are suddenly in place in Washington. They're in the White House, they're in the Congress. So at what point after, say, Bill Clinton became president, did things deteriorate? And we're going to get to social media in a minute because that's obviously a huge contributor to at least the exacerbation of a problem. But I know a lot of people point to Newt Gingrich's reign as Speaker of the House.
94.
All right, and so he encouraged people to go home, congressional leaders to go home on weekends and not stay in Washington and go out to dinner and have, you know, participate in the community of both colleagues and neighborhoods and such. Is that, do you think that was?
Well, that's a fact.
Yeah, that's a fact.
That's a fact because up until John Sherman Cooper was one of the closest friends of Jack Kennedy, and he's a Republican from Kentucky. A lot of it was just who you get along with, who you have chemistry with. They had friends on both sides of the aisle. Tip and Sol Conti were always playing cards on the weekend together, a Republican. It was just a normal thing. You work in the same building, you walk to the vote the same way, they're right next to you. Why you wouldn't not become friends with the other side? Now they're not allowed to make friends. And I can tell you, it's almost weird. Sometimes I think that Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, gets money from people and doesn't want to be seen hanging around with Republicans because then the people who give her money say, why am I giving her money? I'm friends with her. How come they're friends with him? It's a weird thing of almost high school stuff about being in different sororities or fraternities. What's this warfare about? It's unnatural. But the thing about Newt was, and he was pernicious, he told people when they got elected, freshman members of Congress, keep your wife at home, usually your wife, keep your wife at home. Don't let her come to Washington because she'll meet somebody and shop with them or hang out with them or whatever. And don't bring your press secretary too. Leave the press secretary back in your district so you can stay in touch with local media. So in a sense, it was smart because it was all about grabbing a couple of seats and holding on to them. But he was making sure that there wasn't any friendliness between the two parties. That was sort of an official conduct of the worst. Well, Newt Gingrich was really he was not sociable. He didn't believe in society. He was something else.
Yeah, well.
And he got thrown out the door. I mean, you were right.
So I can remember in advance of maybe your show or Meet the Press, we're in the green room where everybody kind of waits their turn to be called to the set. And you would have Democratic leaders. This was the fun part of doing TV, is because you were going to be communing with all these leaders that you might not otherwise get an audience with as easily. And so we're sitting in this room, and you know, you've got the Republicans over here and the Democrats over here, and they are like, they're enemies. You know, it's like they were getting tournament tough before they would go on the air, getting ready to. Yeah, exactly. So that was part of it. And then now this generation of leaders, I mean, you talk about professionalism, I want to talk about maturity. I see these people as, I mean, now I've gotten older, of course, so that means something, I'm sure, in that calculation, but their behavior is just so absurd and embarrassing.
Try to organize a dinner party with 8 people and put a Republican in there. And to me, it's natural.
Well, you should always have one more.
Look at my brothers. I have 3 brothers who voted for Trump and 2 the second time, and I think I grew up in a Republican family. I obviously can get along with people on that any kind, but some people cannot meet with them. There are people in Washington who are very well educated, law degrees, doctoral, and they've never met a Republican Trumpy. There's just not a positive note about them. They don't know anybody because they don't want to know anybody.
Well, they're also choosing to convene with others of their own
Like everybody else
philosophy.
does it too.
Right, so you go to the same watering. I mean, I'm not telling you all anything you don't already know, as far as just, you know, finding the watering hole where you can be affirmed in your, you know, your ideas and beliefs, so that you don't have to deal with truth or fact.
It carries over in the way we looked at this election. For example, Herschel Walker.
Please.
I'm just going to say it. He was not a typical Republican, and but he had all this embarrassment about his life. And the fact is that you were supposed to vote for him because you want to vote for a Republican majority. It was basically a parliamentary election. You got to vote for the right member of parliament so that he or she will vote for the right prime minister. And so even Fetterman, who had questions about his health, and some of them were okay, reasonable, but they would have people back him because he's a Democrat. Oh, he's a vote for you know, Schumer, the Democratic leader. So a lot of people were voted like in a parliamentary election. I think this worked its way out to a lot of places where people voting against Kelly out in Arizona they just wanted the Republicans to control the Senate. And that's a new American. We used to like to know who our senators were, primarily who they are, whether we liked them or not. And it wasn't about what party they represented exactly. It was a combination. But this new vote of parliamentary support is new and it makes us more divided. I mean, Tim Scott votes with Republicans. That's why he gets the votes. That's where most of his votes come from. They want him to vote with Republicans. If he stopped voting with Republicans and organizing the Senate, things would change. I would suggest that things would change.
I suspect so. And he's, of course, raised enormous amounts of money for both his reelection just last week, and then also, was it last week or was this week? Yeah, this week. And also, there's the idea that he might run for president.
Yes, there's talk of that.
And the Republicans love that, of course, because Tim Scott is,
well,
you know, he's got a great
Haley
story.
I think fits in that world of Trump, guess who's going to be my VP, which is a game I think he'll start playing in a week or two. He'll announce it and he'll say, but I'm not sure who my vice president is going to be. And he'll be playing around with Chris Christie and all kinds of people, and the former Secretary of State. He'll be playing around with that for months because that's a big lure. Who's going to be my VP? And they'll all be sucking up to him because everybody wants to be a VP with a guy who could be president again, I think.
So what about Donald Trump is now threatening he's been teasing about some announcement next week, big announcement. What do you think he's going to say?
Well, to keep his pride up, he will point to a victory of J.D. Vance in Ohio. He will find victors. Perhaps he might be able to say by then in Nevada that he got a guy elected out there at Laxalt, if the guy wins, question mark. So he'll point to his victories.
He didn't have that many, though.
He didn't have many. He lost with Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, who's going back to New Jersey, which I got to tell you, was the best political shot ever, because everybody in Philadelphia, where I grew up, knows where down the shore is. Down the shore means in Jersey. It means you run in your own place. Why don't you run in Jersey? You're from Jersey. Why are you running here? It was a more profound issue than Fetterman's health problem with his stroke. Much bigger issue, because people say, I know where Jersey is. They're over there. And I go there too a lot in the summer, but they better stay there. So it's a hot issue, and it worked. It sounds so high schoolish, but you know, you're from another school, stay there. And so he lost on that issue. He'll go back now.
So you don't think he's going to announce that he's going to run?
Figuring out Trump.
It's sort of a bad idea, and
figuring out Trump is hard to do.
George runoff race, it's very risky.
I think he's going to do a conditional, depending on if the Democrats don't put me in jail.
Well,
he's doing this to protect himself, I think, because he thinks he's better off to be able to say, oh, that's just a political game. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, all he's up to is trying to nail a Republican. I know what he's up to. He's against all of us, not just me, which isn't true. Or Letitia James in New York, or in the Georgia case, give me 12,000 votes, things like that. There's a lot of handy material out there to hit him with. I think he should be hit with what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. And I believe when he met that crowd outside the Capitol, the White House, and when he razzed them up and sent them up there, and when he grabbed the steering wheel, wanting to join them, he's saying get up there and stop the vice president from signing that document ratifying the election in the Electoral College. And I believe he seriously endangered the life of the president had those people gotten a hold of him. And he watched it on television for 2 hours to see if they did get a hold of him. I have to say, it looks to me like attempted murder. It looks that like. And I would throw it before a DC jury. I just think there's so much there that cannot be denied that he went after his own vice president. He picked himself and said he's not strong enough. He's not a good guy. He deserves what is coming to him. Just tell me what he was doing with that steering wheel. I want to go up there with him. Come on.
So is Pence going to run?
To no effect.
To no effect. So we've been
I mean, he's an evangelical. He was born Roman Catholic. He became an evangelical. I know a number of people like that. They have much more fervor in their religion. I understand that. But I don't think he has a national constituency that I can think of.
So what about Donald Trump's popularity at this point? Do you think that he still has the base in hand, and do you think that he can still run a successful campaign?
Poll the Republican Party. Right now, he has an enormous number of people who believe he won the election in 2020, just because he said so. Like he used to say that Barack Obama came from Kenya until he stopped saying so. They believe it because he said so. This is power that we've never seen before in politics, where people actually will tell you face to face, this is what I believe. Why do you believe it? He said so. It's a cult. To be able to make people think like you're a messiah, to get people to believe your spoken word as if it is the truth against all other evidence. And there is no evidence that election was, we have a great system in our country called democracy. It works hand in glove with our freedom. We have freedom because we can vote people out of office, like we did with Roe v. Wade. We can vote them out. If we don't like what they're doing, we can vote against their policies. And it's the way the thing works is you get freedom because you vote and vote because you have freedom to vote. It's a wonderful system that the whole world has, in many cases, tried to emulate, and they still do. And Trump's saying things like, there are third world countries that have cleaner elections than we do. That is just ragging on America. That's a horrible thing to say. There are third world countries that have failed elections because they don't, every time they get an election, they accuse the winner of being a cheat, and they say it's a stolen, or they hang them like they did in Pakistan. We don't hang our former leaders.
Not yet.
Not yet. We don't do it. But the idea that we don't have a good democracy, what bigger shot are you going to take against this country? If we don't have democracy, we're not the same country. And who's this character that probably never read a history book, doesn't know anything about our history, coming out and challenging our credibility as a democratic country? Who is he to do this? I don't think he studied anything at school but business. I can't understand otherwise.
And had to avoid STDs. Remember his Vietnam?
Well, he did say that.
His own personal
He did make
Vietnam.
that comment. I asked him about abortion rights, and he said, if a woman has an abortion, he told me to my face, there needs to be some form of punishment. But then I said, well, there's usually a man involved in these situations. And he said, nothing for him. He's unbelievable. He's unbelievable how open he is. If you listen
Okay, so you have a wonderful
just listen to
theory.
his words, you can figure the guy out.
You have a wonderful theory about why Donald Trump still has supporters and admirers. And this is a baffling puzzle to so many of us. And I think you described it earlier today, and I thought it was just right on the nail was hit on the head. Would you go through that?
Well, I think a lot of times, a lot of liberal Democrats with Ivy League degrees in many cases are condescending to conservatives, condescending to working people who work with their hands. It's obvious. It's Hillary, for example, referring to deplorables. I know a labor leader in Pennsylvania, Iowa I was speaking to. So what's this deplorables thing? They heard it. Working people heard it. Who are you to talk about me being deplorable? And even Barack Obama, and I got no problem with Barack, he said, and to a very fancy group out in San Francisco, people who cling to their guns and their religion. Yeah, well, I don't cling to guns, but I do cling to my religion. And is that a bad thing? This contempt they have for regular people, I mean regular people, everyday people, they call them, everyday people, has gotten out there. And it explains to me this sort of attitude that people have towards them. They're really happy when they lose, the other liberals, because the liberals are so contemptuous of regular people. And it's true, that it's so true that it explains, I think, a lot of the anger people have toward them and the reason they would raise up a guy like Trump, who's obviously not honest, who doesn't pretend to be honest, but doesn't pay his bills, doesn't return government documents, nothing. He doesn't hold any transaction that he's been a part of. He didn't agree that he lost the election when it was based on a transaction, people voting. And he couldn't handle that he lost the same way he won. Close election, this time you lost. Same deal, but you got to say you lost. No. So that's Trump. And
but you were also saying that what they were identifying with was, oh my gosh, look at this man, he has everything. He has
that part, that's so true. The big gold tower, the beautiful wife, he called her the supermodel. All this about him, everything is about him. The regular guy says, God, he's got all that and he agrees with me? That's my attitude. How come he agrees with me? You know, this guy's got everything and he's agreeing with me. I must be right. Trump figured out the thing like Hawley has in Kansas and a few other people with great educations. They figured out the way to win an election, or J.D. Vance. Now, even if you write a book dumping on Trump, if you learn to talk like him, you win. So even though you go to Harvard or Yale or whatever, you go, you know what, I'm with you. And so J.D. Vance says, I'm with the pro-Trump crowd.
Yeah.
It's a flip. It's like selling a house you bought for 2 weeks ago and raising the price. It's so obvious what they're doing, and the people don't see through that.
Well, I don't understand why the
I can do
Republicans...
that about media people, but I don't want to get in fights with media people because it's the same terrain, but that's going on there too. They don't really buy this stuff. That's what I don't think.
Well, why? So he has such a hold on the Republicans in Congress that they will simply not contradict him. I did notice last week I was watching CNN. I guess it was Monday actually, it was the day before the election, and Kevin McCarthy, who's about to become the Speaker of the House, was being interviewed, and he was asked, well, do you think Trump will support you as Speaker? And he said, well, yeah, I think he'll support me. And he said, do you think you need his support to become Speaker? And do you think you need his support to win back the House? And he said, you know, the voters have all the power. He was definitely sort of deflecting any idea that he was in league with Trump. And I thought in that moment, is he trying to distance himself a little bit? And is that a good sign? Is that a possible signal that the Republicans are going to try to be a little bit less radical?
Well,
now he's still going to, because
you're talking about MAGA. You're talking about two polar opposites. You're talking about the guy at the top who created MAGA, and the people who are regular people at the bottom who are in his base, who you better not mess with. And I think that's why Kevin McCarthy is scared to death of him. Why Mitch McConnell very cleverly avoids talking about him. But most people say, maybe not DeSantis now, but most people avoid open war with him because he can bring out the base. And you know, my brothers, I got two brothers I swear would vote for him again, and I had three. And one's
Why?
There are a lot of reasons you vote Republican today that have nothing to do with Trump. One reason, if you're a gun nut, my brother's a gun nut. I mean, he has 100 rifles. He has them in case the government comes to try to get them, and then he'll have them to use against the government. I mean, it's almost like that. I don't want to characterize what he does, but he's a Second Amendment guy, right down the line, Second Amendment. Not a hunter, environmentalist, all those good things, but he wants the guns to protect himself against the government, which is a lot of people talk like that, and I think he believes it. My brother Jim's a regular country club guy who is around Republicans all day and wants to be popular. He likes them. He likes being popular. I mean, it just is, you know. It's just
well,
my older brother's the smart one. My older brother voted, and his wife voted. Parents who are over here voted for him the first time, but then switched to Buttigieg. Now, that's a switch.
That's a switch.
They went right over to Buttigieg. So, and I think they'd probably back him for president if it came to it. So they were discerned that after watching him in office, they saw he wasn't the clown he looked like, but he was frightening. And I think, just assuming that's what they meant. But a lot of people have different issues. They're Republican. They don't like big spending. They don't like government waste. Sometimes they don't like foreign policy like the Democrats. There are a lot of reasons to be a Republican or a Democrat that forces you to choose. And as we've been talking about before, you choose Republican because what else are you going to do? Vote for Pelosi? No way. People are going to do that. They don't want to vote for her.
In
So
2016, it was about the Supreme Court, I think, mostly.
Merrick Garland.
Well, the people that voted for Trump supported him despite the fact that they disliked most everything about him, about his personality, about his approach to things, but they wanted to get conservatives on the Supreme Court. And we've seen what the result of that is, because that was the goal. I mean,
I think they had a good law. I'm not a big worshiper of Roe v. Wade, but I thought there was something in it that was emblematic of our morality, which is early term, that's one thing.
Well,
late term is not that thing. It's not the same thing. And there has to be a lot more respect for the late term pregnancy. And I think that the American people said, yeah, that's okay for me. I can live with it. It's not perfect because I don't like abortion, but I can live with it because it leaves the option open to people who believe they need the option. And so it was American in a sense.
Well, they accepted it because they wanted the option. But, scholars on both sides of the political spectrum will say that it was not good law. I know
Sandra Day O'Connor and RBG and all those people. I know a lot of people had a problem. I'm just saying, as the crude as law can sometimes be, what you have is a lot better than what you're going to end up with is this state-by-state thing, which we have no idea how bad that's going to get in some states.
Well, and after having 50 years, that seems like a precedent to me. But what do I know?
The girl in 16, I mean, she's 16 or 17 out in Utah or Arkansas or anywhere. Here, I mean, you're gonna what's the law again? Well, it's different. It's different now.
Well, Chris, you said you thought that this turnout, the election, most of us thought, well, it's the economy. All the polls were showing economy first. Next was abortion, but it was very low. Like economy was 51% and abortion was 15%. And then all of a sudden, NBC came out with a new poll.
I know, and it all happened at the end.
Flipped.
I mean, well, one thing, the Republicans thought it was a big three issue. It's always big three with Republicans starting in 46. It used to be in 1952, communism, Korea, and corruption. Then it was amnesty and whatever, and abortion and acid. And now it's inflation, crime, and the border. Well, they wanted to be about those three issues. It didn't become those issues. It ended up being something more like the economy to some extent, and abortion rights to some extent, and maybe just generally not feeling they wanted to punish Biden. There wasn't an urge to punish Biden so much. I think Biden at the end went after the young vote. He came out, he was green, he was for student loans. You know, he was pushing in that direction. He knew who he was trying to grab the attention. He was trying to reach students, and interesting. It may have worked.
In terms of public discourse, what are your thoughts on how we became so hyper-partisan? I mean, we've talked about sort of the trends since the war, since the Vietnam War, the influence of Newt Gingrich and things like that, but this is a whole new level of.
Yeah.
It's like I can just judge that from my column, from the mail I receive. Back in the day when people had to actually write a letter, it was always pretty nice because, it's hard to stay mad all the way to the end of the stamp and the address. But as people became more, as they could comment online and just not identify themselves and so on, it became nastier and nastier. And so I can just tell you that it's much, much worse. People don't disagree with me. They're not interested in an argument or a debate. They're interested in killing me. They hate me.
Aren't you on the QAnon list?
They want to destroy me. Yeah,
I'm on a
QAnon hit list. I had to have security people come to my house, and that's absurd. I mean, what are they so upset about? Why are we crazier than we've ever been? Do you think social media has just made us, by liberating the id, we've become kind of this ungovernable people?
Anonymity. It's given
anonymity.
They are completely free to be anything they want as long as they get the ugliness across to you personally. As long as the person they're aiming at feels really bad for a couple seconds, they have succeeded by complete anonymity. It's really an awful system. It's like, I don't know what it's like, but this is an example why it's so familiar. A couple blocks from our house in Washington, D.C. is this pizza place called Comet Pizza. And it features pizza, big tables, bring the whole family, your cousins, everybody there, and start gobbling up some great pizza. And no coffee. They still have dessert there and some salads, but it's basically a pizza joint. And in the back, there's free ping pong. Very international.
Free ping pong.
Free ping pong.
Never.
So this is the place where QAnon, or whoever it was, decided was a nest of child molestation. That this is where they're going to get what's going on in the basement. That, well, nobody knew about it because it didn't have a basement. There was no basement in this pizza place. There's just a local neighborhood pizza joint. So a guy comes in there with a rifle and starts shooting into the roof and everything like he's John Wayne, thinking he has learned of this through social media. And he's going to get these varmints. He's going to get these people. And now he eventually, I guess, discovered this was just a pizza joint. But look what he's willing to do. Look at what he's willing to do with Paul Pelosi. An 82-year-old guy started pounding in his head with a hammer. People are operating. They're going operative on social media. They're not just thinking about it. They're not just writing rotten notes to you in the middle of the night from their basement or from whatever they're. They're not even doing that. They're going out and doing stuff. They went to the Capitol. They came to the Capitol and broke in and dumped all everything and tried to take it over, basically, and stop the Constitution from working because they heard some stuff.
Yeah.
And they're acting on it. So we have to say, if it has that power, it's going to continue. It's going to be bothering us. And I was a cop, and I looked through all those policemen, and I said, these guys are the most courageous people in the world. But I think the really courageous people with Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney is right out of Thomas More. I mean, she just stood against the king all by herself. She gave up her career. And I don't know what those people in Wyoming are going to think someday. They gave up a person of true courage and honesty in the cause of Donald Trump. Well, that's what they did.
Well, let's talk a minute.
And I also think the voters went out. I am thrilled at voters who went out and voted, whether a minority or whatever, their kids or not. They were willing to go out and vote positively for something they believed in. Their freedom and their right to vote. And to pick the issues they want to vote on. That's another thing. They decided what they wanted to vote on. This is something that is American. And why we are not cheering it amazes me. Just cheering it, that we can still do that. The turnout was through the roof. In a year, everybody's feeling gloomy and everybody's saying this is the downtime in our history. It's not going to be that great. Well, it was. So, you know, it's not only we have clean elections, we have big elections where people have to run for their lives. As I said, the governor of New York was running for her life. And people like even Chuck Grassley at 87, he's out there racing for his life. And Michael Bennett and all across the country, people are fighting for their, this is what we want. Not like a a Putin election where there's one guy running. We want a real election where there's people chasing them. They can actually beat them. That's a real election. You can go and vote. It's going to make a difference how you voted. It's going to make a difference in Nevada and Arizona. It's made a difference in New York where Sean Patrick Maloney, I like the guy. I called him up the morning before the election. Nice guy. He's out of work. He is out of work now, the head of the Democratic Campaign Committee, because the voters in New York were concerned about crime. And they listened to Lee Zeldin, who got a pretty good vote against the governor. So we got a great election system. It's working. That's what I think.
Well, let's talk. My watch has stopped, so I don't know where we are on time. But I did want to just touch down on the media a little bit and our role in advancing or not advancing public discourse. So did you think about that when you were the host of Hardball? Were you ever conscientious about how do I make this constructive, and did you get criticism ever for?
All the time. Look, my attitude is why I care about politics is why I care about it. I didn't have any extra reason. I care who wins, care who loses. I want to know the best people. I tend to be center-left, a little bit to the left. And that only shows up when it comes to wars. I thought the Iraq war was a disaster. All we did was kill 4,000 of our own people, 100,000 or more of Iraqis. To what effect? I have no idea. Because if anything Israel cared about was having two countries, Arab countries, fighting with each other, Iraq and Iran. They don't benefit from the lack of Iran being there, Iraq. They benefited from that buffer state. So I didn't like that war. So that puts me on the left, a couple other issues. But I am fiscally responsible. I don't believe in this new monetary policy, which I think is a joke. I think new monetary policy means inflation. You spend more money after fewer goods and fewer services, you will raise the price of everything. That's what happens in economics, supply and demand. You have more people, more dollars chasing fewer goods means higher prices. It just does. And so despite what Paul Krugman of the New York Times writes twice a week, he's wrong. Larry Summers was right when he warned us about this coming inflation and perhaps recession coming after that. So I think the squad is well-intentioned. They're young people, they're minority people. I think they're off base when it comes to what will sell with 50% of the population, or 52%, which is all you need now to win. I think they're not clicking with that. But that they have to represent minority communities and poor people. I understand that, but it's not. It shouldn't be the standard that Pelosi follows. She should say, I hear you, you're part of my coalition, but you're wrong. You try doing that sometime.
Well, it sounds honest. That would be nice for a change.
And the Republicans have to say to the whack jobs, sorry, I believe in what happened in this election this time, 2022, and I believe what happened in 2020. And I believe what happened in 2016. You got elected, then you were defeated. That's how it works.
Well, a lot of those people who said that are no longer, they're gone now. They either were voted out, they were primaried, or they left because they don't want to deal with it anymore. I worry that good people will not run for public office in the same way that they have in the past. Yeah. Because why put yourself through that? You know, why would anybody want to be attacked constantly, possibly shot while playing
raise $50 million.
Kidnapped? I mean, you know, we've had some horrific events. Hit over the head with a hammer. I mean, that's kind of, you know, it's not, to me, that's not symbolic of a breakdown in public discourse. It's a breakdown in civilization, and they are, I guess, related. I mean, just social norms have been chipped away at so much and for so long that we don't seem to know how to act anymore in almost any circumstance, but particularly in politics. And I don't know what the answer is. I think part of it is education. I think the students today were asking us, well, how do we change this environment so that we are, you know, I'm not going to be George H.W. Bush and say we need a kinder, gentler nation, although that is true. But we've got to teach young people how to gauge news. The smartest thing that Trump did was create fake news. You know, anytime someone said something about him that he didn't like, he could just declare fake news. And that's got a nice ring to it. The base loves it. Fake
news. He said
news.
that to Leslie
They
Stahl.
hate
He
us.
just said it to him.
Those people hate us. I mean, I feel like we've got a target on our backs.
One thing I think is, in what you just said, is that, you know, we were all in high school, we were all in grade school, we went to college in most cases, and we remember the kids at the school that we could have marked from the first day are running for office someday. The young guy, Bill Clinton, who just happens to knows everybody's name. Wait, why would you know everybody's name? I mean, what are you working at this? Why are you making a point of learning everyone's name in the class? Well, you can spot that person. So there are only a number of people. There are other people who like to be doctors or lawyers or business people, make money. They have no interest in doing that. There's just a couple people that decide they're going to be like Nixon or Kennedy eventually, or Kennedy, who wanted to be president of the United States. Bill Clinton wanted to be. LBJ. Who are they? Some of them got themselves in the wrong business, like Al Gore. I don't think ever really wanted to run. Some people, you find themselves after a while to say, I really don't want to do this. But the gung-ho types, the women now, a lot of women today are doing it. Running for office, like Whitmer, watch Whitmer in Michigan. She's a regular person, a grown-up, which I like as a positive word, and you can see her as a potential somebody. Nikki Haley, in her own, somehow had down here the instinct, the spark to pull down the Confederate flag. I mean, how did she know that would make her a leader and make Lindsey Graham go along with her? She was a leader. That's what a leader is. People follow you. A leader is someone who's followed. Everything else is nonsense. If nobody else says, I agree, I'm with him or I'm with her, you're not a leader.
Well, it had to be done at that point. It had to be done at that point.
Well, it was but she did it lickety-split at the right moment. And I think that we are probably in the conversation we've been having here. I've explained why those numbers of young men and women is gradually diminishing. The women are coming up because we're coming from zero in terms of government leadership, and they're reaching it into a larger percentage. But the overall number, I don't know of anybody that wouldn't, if they have a choice between doing something else and running for office, it looks kind of weird to have to raise $50 million to run for a $170,000 a year job. That's really weird. You have
but you're the most
ask people to
powerful
give you
person in the
$50 million
world.
so you can have $170,000 a year. It's a good salary, but not $50 million. And these races now, this race in Georgia in the first week of December is going to be unbelievable because it's everybody in the country saying we got to get that prime ministership. We got to get that vote. We got to get it from Walker, and it's going to be. You won't be able to watch television. You won't be able to watch the news or anything. Their sports events will be stopping every 2 seconds for a commercial. It's going to be ridiculous. Well, it's a good state for sports, though, so they'll manage to squeeze it in. But it's so amazing.
Do we have time to keep going, or do we need to let people ask questions? Q&A? Okay. Anyone have a thought? We're happy to just have a chat. Yes, sir. Does somebody want to take a microphone to this young man? He's right here in the white shirt.
Thank you for being here with us, this evening. My name is Lucas Moyen, and I'm a senior at the College of Charleston. And I wanted to ask you guys about misinformation, because social media, I think, is very interwoven into all of the things that our generation does, and we spend probably many hours on it every day. And most of the people I interact with, I find, are not malicious or trying to believe in false things, but they don't read the news much, and they just pick up on things in social media. So how do we try and get rid of information while still maintaining free speech?
Well, it's terribly important. That's a very good question. We polled our students today. We talked to 3 different classes, and we polled them, and they're all on TikTok now. And you know how it was when the parents went on Facebook, the kids went to Twitter, and now that we're all over on Twitter, they went to TikTok, and they're getting their news from TikTok. In addition to watching dance moves and such, they're figuring things, they're getting information from that, which just terrifies me. We did meet one young lady who said that she goes there, she said the right thing, okay, this is the correct answer, that she goes to TikTok just to sort of check in and see what people are talking about. And she'll say, oh, well, that's an interesting thought, or that's an interesting news bit, I'll go research it. And then she goes and pursues her own research, which is what I do, when I go about trying to develop a column. I see what people are interested in, and because I want to write about what people are interested in, and then I say, well, then I do my own research, of course. So I think, education is key to all of this, and we need to start in elementary school, teaching kids how to be discerning and gauging what is fact, what is not true. And there are objective standards that you could apply, and I know there's some organizations doing that currently. There's the News Literacy Project, which was started about 15 years ago by some of America's greatest editors, and they've developed curricula for schools at different levels, and they're teaching kids coming along. We need to do that across the board in every grade in every school, and in college as well, because you have to learn how to make those judgments. It's not going to just come naturally to you. And of course, one way is you find the people that you do trust in the news, and I would say the mainstream media, because we do have standards, and we do have fact checkers, and we do have editors who who insist that we get things right, and if we don't, there are consequences. So find out who those people are. Read the papers that are, the Washington Post, of course, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and there are others. The local paper is a very good paper, and I think they're one of the few left that are still doing a great job in a community of this size. Maybe that's because it's family owned, but in any case, congratulations to the local paper. So I think, you've got to figure out who the people are that you trust, and you go to those people and those organizations for your information. And you trust them because they're legitimate. They're not somebody that's, just gone to the restroom and made up a story and put it on TikTok or wherever, and somebody's gonna believe that. Somebody's just gonna take that in and say, oh, that's got to be true because we used to joke, it was on the internet, so it must be true. I would assume that nothing is true until you've decided for yourself, done the research, and gone to legitimate sources for that purpose. That was a long-winded answer to a simple question, but it's not an easy task because social media is way bigger than anything we've ever seen. It's bigger than all of us. We can't figure out we certainly can't control it. And we shouldn't. We don't want to control it, but we have to be, educated consumers.
When I was growing up, my grandma, who didn't have much education, she would say, well, you know what they say? That was her answer.
You know what they say?
There was a they up there, pretty high up. Well, you know what they say? And that was whatever is true. You know what they say? There is no they now. There is no establishment that is recognized by the average person that says they say. There's no such thing. There is no they. You have to come up with your own. So I was very impressed today with one of the students who said, who influences you? And she said, my parents. I said, this is pretty nice. She's got parents that she believes in. And when they say, my dad always said to me, where'd you get that idea? His favorite line was, who told you that? Because he was always questioning the teachers. Where you get that? That's a pretty good question, by the way. Who told you that? Where'd you get that from? You got to. It forces the person to say a little with embarrassment. Well, I heard it in school, or I heard it. Oh, okay, that's what you heard. That's all you heard. You don't know what actually is the case. So, getting people to be skeptical and when they hear something that's. Pat Moynihan, the senator from New York, he died a couple of years ago. He used to say people are entitled to their own opinions, but not to their own facts.
Exactly.
And you can't just make up stuff, and you got to question kids about facts. And maybe there's a parental role here, but I think there is, because we've learned almost everything before we came to school from our parents, and that's how we learn. What school to go to, everything, what team to root for, almost what religion we are. So much comes from our parents. It's extraordinary to think about how little doesn't come from your parents. And I think we have to show some, I hate to tell people what to do, but you got to be a leader as much as you can.
Everybody has to be a leader.
I think you have to do it.
I think that's right. That sounds good to me. Well, by the way, that child was an underclassman. We talked later to some upperclassmen and asked about were the parents a source of information for them, and they went, I think some of them might be sitting in this room. Anyway, anyone else have a question or a comment? Yes, back there.
Okay. Thank you all so much. I just kind of can't believe I'm about to say this, but I sort of agree with Mitch McConnell that candidate quality does matter. And I think that, yes, we're voting against the other party and for our party, and sometimes we'll overlook problematic candidates. But I do sort of see a glimmer of hope in the split ticket. Like Brian Kemp way outran Herschel Walker in Georgia, and we're now leading to a runoff. And I think, we're sort of seeing that with Mark Kelly and Blake Masters, and nobody can take down Marcy Kaptur in Ohio because this guy lied about his service in Afghanistan. And so, yes, I do think that we're voting sort of for our own party, but I also think, as Mitch McConnell said, candidate quality matters, and a higher quality candidate that also happens to be our party, I think, is who we're going to support. And a split ticket, I think, South Carolina is one of 5 states that has straight ticket voting, and I think it's a pretty problematic thing for our state because we enable people to just click that straight Republican or straight Democrat button and not put in any thought process to who they're actually voting for. And so my little hope for our democracy is that I think split ticket and being able to support both parties and their candidates is still a thing, but I think it requires high-quality candidates from both sides.
Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. The candidate is the most important person in this equation.
The interesting thing, along that line in Georgia, when they have this runoff in December, Kemp doesn't have to face the runoff. He's already won. And the fact that his vote will not be his name will not be on the ballot probably is going to lessen the Republican vote. If it's just voting for Walker, I think it's going to hurt Walker. We'll see. That's what I think. I think it's going to be a tough road for Walker to win. Tough election.
I think if we're talking, I keep trying to bring it back to public discourse, and I was thinking, what is civil discourse? And what I was able to land on is that the greatest affront to civil discourse is the lie, dishonesty, the lie that some politicians tell, the big lie of the stolen election that Donald Trump continues to tell. And I think that is his most criminal act of all, is that he perpetuated this myth, this complete fabrication. And yet, you can't prove a negative. And so even though we've covered the bases, I mean, everybody is quite certain that the ballots were cast appropriately and that he lost the election fair and square. But what do we do about that? What do we do about that? This lie that, and the more we in the media talk about the big lie, the more the base becomes animated and agitated to prove us wrong by putting Donald Trump back in office or electing his acolytes. Is there an answer to that?
Well, not to that. I think when you talk about something being dishonest, that's a good thing to say that. To say that all the people that voted for Trump are whack jobs is a mistake.
Well, they're not.
There's a lot of reasons to vote Republican. You only get a binary choice on Election Day. On Election Day, it's sort of like an odd or even. It's not even a choice. It's one or the other, really. It's a choice of one thing, Republican or Democrat. So in the end, after you watch all the debates and you pay attention to the TV ads and reading the paper, the columnists, you come to a conclusion, maybe the Democratic guys are right about this thing, but I can't stand them. I can't stand the liberals. So I'm going to vote for Trump, even though I don't like him. So in the end, you make the choice on what's been given to you as a jury. What's given to you is a choice between two people, in the end, to vote on. So you really don't have any options besides choosing one of the two. So it is a tough one. So you got to find a way to attack Trump's lie without making it too close to attacking the voter. I agree with that.
Well, that's always
That's a tough challenge.
But I think January 6th is going to work against him in a big way. I really do. Even people who might otherwise.
Just look at the faces of those cops.
But the thing
look
about
at the faces on those cops when they're defending the Capitol. And what's going through their eyes. What's going through their heads and their eyes. The people are the people that look just like them out in that crowd. They may have voted for Trump, but they just want to. These people look like me. They were at the last church I was at, or my church. Why are they doing this? Why are they attacking me with all this weaponry that they picked up along the way? And what do they look like they want to kill me? And they act like they got to beat them up on the ground, these guys. And
well, they were traumatized. Well, some steps have certainly been taken to try to make those people accountable, and I think some have gone off to visit some prison cells, and so that's all good. But we can't let that sort of thing happen again, and I feel that anytime Donald Trump is in the arena, there's always this sort of undercurrent of potential violence, and it could be violence against us because Trump has encouraged people to pound the media, hit them, knock them down. I mean, we've seen this and heard this. So I don't know. I will never understand. I understand the attraction. I understand the resentment of the elites on the liberal side. And but I still will never quite understand how we lost sight of the America we all share, and how we can be so completely different. Have our views out the window are completely different. But anyway.
Thank you.
That's a problem to be further discussed and resolved over centuries, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both. Let us give our presenters a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, sweetie.
Thank you, Kathleen, for hosting this. Chris, before we let you go.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you for being here, and this is a small token of our appreciation.
Oh my God!
This is what's called a brackish tie, bow tie, and it's actually made for our 250th anniversary 2 years ago. So I hope maybe next time you appear on TV, you'll sport some College of Charleston spirit.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
All right, well, thank you all for coming and braving the weather, and hope you all were learned something or found something to go home and cuss about. And if there are any veterans in the crowd, thank you for your service. And
Thank you.
And that's that.